Welcome to the third webinar in this series. I'm Amanda Loeffen, CEO of Human Rights Water. Our NGO has a mission to find governance solutions that support access to water and sanitation using international legal standards and norms. Practically, this means putting vulnerable people first in our thinking in order to reach the last 10% of people without current access to safe drinking water, the 29% without access to water for hand washing, and the 50% without safely managed toilet facilities. So today we're trying to examine why we're not achieving the progress needed to provide water and sanitation for all, and to see if there's a practical means to accelerate this process through the support of public-private partnerships. There's a lack of funding worldwide that's been earmarked for this challenge. Up to 114 billion per annum is needed, according to the World Bank, for new infrastructure. So how do we create more trust in the private sector to be human rights based in their approach? And how do we build on government commitments to respect those crucial human rights by partnering with financial institutions so that marginalized communities can be protected? I'm privileged to introduce a diverse panel of water finance, utility and PPP experts from the UN, the development sector, NGOs, and a representative of private water service providers. Sadly, Olteonda, who is Vice Chair of UN Water, is going to speak for us today, and he's been unable to attend for reasons to do with the pandemic. And so we have Klaus Moldeus taking his place. We have Patricia Lopez from the World Bank, Geoffrey Hamilton from the UNECE PPP division, Irina Tsay, an NGO leading social PPP projects in Ukraine and around and other countries in the world, and Dhot from AQUAFED. The program today is for a series of short presentations from the panelists, followed by moderated discussion. There's an opportunity for a live Q&A in the last half an hour with questions from the attendees. So I encourage you to send in your questions through the Q&A icon at the foot of your screen. The live chat is also open for interactive discussion, and you're welcome to make comments throughout the webinar. But first, allow me to introduce and welcome our co-host today, Dr. Anand Chiplunkar. Currently on the board of Human Rights Water, and until 2016, he was director of the Urban Development and Water Division in the Central and West Asia Department of the Asian Development Bank in Manila. Anand brings a wealth of experience from 30 years in urban infrastructure development and environmental management. His expertise lies in developing PPP projects in partnership with government agencies in urban, industrial area development, transport and tourism sectors, and I'm sure that he'll open this event with some thought-provoking ideas. Anand.
Thank you, Amanda, and a warm welcome to all the panelists, eminent speakers, and our participants. Today's webinar is indeed going to be quite interesting. I'm going to be having some small 3-4 slides which I'm going to be sharing with you as I'm speaking, just so that we have some of the important points captured in what I'm saying. Hopefully the slides are now visible to you. Yeah. So when we are looking at the PPPs, to be honest, PPPs have been around since the 1990s. And if you look at a quick brief way in which the PPPs developed, the first generation PPPs in the 1990s, and I call them as the first generation because that time the focus was more on attracting the private sector, and the condition that did emerge as a cause for social non-acceptance of the PPP modality. So this was the challenge and possibly a failure also because of the high tariffs and the runaway profits, but it did kickstart the PPP projects quite a bit, largely. Now, the second generation PPPs, as I call them, in the early 2000s, they tried to balance the through a public sector comparator or value for money practices. and resulting from a fairly large-scale infrastructure requirement, large investment requirement, and at the same time a weak fiscal position, which led to, I would say, the change in which the PPPs were structured. And many countries did refocus upon PPPs. But even at that water and sanitation services to the poor and vulnerable were still something which were yet not reaching to the right level. Now, at this stage, let me just briefly bring your focus to the human rights issue to water. The UN resolution in 2010, that is when most of the countries will be provided. Now, when we see people are entitled to sufficient, safe, acceptable, physically accessible, as well as affordable water for personal and domestic use. Now, when we look at this scenario, let me move a little ahead to 2015 after the Millennium Development Goals, where we had the Sustainable Development Goals being brought in. And these Sustainable Development Goals are for the betterment of mankind, for people at large. Now, as far as water and sanitation is concerned, I won't go through the whole list of it, but water and sanitation for all as a primary goal. And there are many related goals, all of which have an impact on the well-being of the people. So with this, let me come to now the other part of our today's first PPPs. Now, I call them as the third generation PPPs, primarily because unlike the first generation, which focused on private sector, and the second one more on looking at the public sector comparator, the third generation PPPs is focusing on the people first, so that the relevant SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, are enshrined in the PPP contracts. So we are now also adding focus which have been identified in the Sustainable Development Goals. There's also an element of climate resilience which is brought into the design. But most importantly, the SDG 17.17, which is to encourage and promote effective public-private, and civil society partnerships, so that is the key, I would say, SDG, which is linked with the people first PPP financing, which brings down the cost of the overall traditional financing sources by bringing in impact financiers for PPPs, is something which also is being introduced. So to sort of quickly just sum up on the topic today, I'm looking forward, like you, to hear from our eminent panelists on the interlink between people first PPPs and the need for human right-based approach in the delivery of water sanitation. Now, the webinar could not have come at a more appropriate time when where it is recognized that one needs to have adequate water. The hygiene element, which is a preventive or an essential tool in arresting the spread of COVID-19. So obviously, human rights to water forms an inescapable aspect of WASH. So I would like to now stop at this point and over to Amanda. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anand. At this point, I'd like to introduce Klaus Moldeus, who is going to speak on behalf of Olce Unva from UN Water. Klaus, I'm has stepped in right at the very last minute. I don't even have a bio for him, but I know he's a big supporter of the Sustainable Development Goals and is very well aware of what the UN Water Group is doing in terms of realizing SDG 6 and the importance of looking for solutions, and particularly with valuing water, which is the theme for next year. So please can I hand the floor over to you, Klaus?
Thanks so much, Amanda. Do you hear me okay?
Yes.
So, hi everyone, and thanks for inviting me today. Olcay, the UN Water Vice Chair, could not join us, as Amanda said, last minute, but I'm happy to be here for this event. And as we have heard already, COVID-19 has laid bare the chronic underinvestment into water and sanitation systems, leaving the poor more vulnerable than ever. It is clear that to have a chance to achieve SDG 6, new sources of financing will need to be untapped. At the same time, we know that to be successful, we need to ensure a human rights-based approach that prioritizes marginalized groups and reach the billions of people living without basic services. So the topic of today's discussion is so important because it shows that these two needs, increasing finance, including from the private sector, and prioritizing marginalized groups, can indeed be addressed jointly to have even greater impact. And I look forward to exploring these opportunities together with you today. So the water and sanitation crisis demands a holistic, systemic, and multilateral response. And water and sanitation cut across all three pillars of the United Nations: peace and security, human rights, and development. So first, peace and security. With 280 water courses shared by 2 or more countries, and with growing water stress, improving water management and strengthening water cooperation is essential to address risks of water-related disputes and promote peace. And second, human rights. The right to safe drinking water was first recognized by the General Assembly 10 years ago, followed by the human right to sanitation being explicitly recognized 5 years later. And finally, sustainable development. Water is required to deliver almost all other SDGs, from global health to food security, and is essential for resilience to climate change. So this cross-cutting nature of water reveals the need to properly value water in all its dimensions and uses. This is why the United Nations World Water Development Report and UN Water's global campaign next year will be dedicated to the topic of valuing water. The 2021 report will seek to determine the multiple values of water as perceived by different groups and how recognizing these perspectives can help elevate water on the political agenda. Today's focus on people-first public-private partnerships also aligns with key messages from earlier World Water Development reports, including the 2016 report on water and jobs and the World Water Day campaign on the same topic. Water and jobs enjoy a symbiotic relationship that has the power to transform people's lives. Water, sanitation, and decent work will provide a foundation for success for the 2030 agenda and help unlock its potential for transforming our world. So dear all, as COVID-19 spreads across the globe, we have in front of us a unique opportunity to build back better. The United Nations system has launched on 9th of July, so recently, the SDG 6 Global Acceleration Framework, with the aim to deliver fast results at an increased scale in countries. Driven by country demand and coordinated by UN Water, the framework aims to unify the international community support to countries for SDG 6. Today's event, with its focus on how we can engage all stakeholders to better promote and integrate human rights-based implementation of SDG 6, is an important contribution to our collective endeavor to accelerate progress on water and sanitation. So at UN Water, we look forward to working more with all of you as we take bold action to accelerate human rights-based progress on SDG 6. Thank you.
Thank you, Klaus. It's very nice to have that overview and put things into perspective. And I'd like to now perhaps go to a more practical level and introduce Patricia Lopez, who works for the World Bank as a senior infrastructure finance specialist. She coordinates several operations in the Europe and Central Asia region. She's not a stranger to finding collaborative solutions in complex situations, having led the World Bank program in the Danube for several years, combining a background in project and corporate finance and design of solutions for water and sanitation services, particularly with the participation of the private sector and PPPs. I'm looking forward to hearing about the projects that she's been working on with the World Bank and her insights into how they can support SDG6.
Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you very much to Amanda and to the whole Human Right to Water team for inviting us to speak in this very meaningful and timely event. I'm going to be focusing on WASH within the SDG 6. It would be SDG 6.1 and 6.2. And provide a couple of examples as asked by the organizers that were very keen that we speak about some real life examples. So with that, I'm going to share my screen and go to the few slides. Okay. I hope everyone can see the slides. Okay. Okay, so first of all, achieving the SDG 6, for achieving it, the status quo is not an option. Many of you already talked about the financing gap being still quite huge. If we look at the graphs, the water on the left side, sanitation on the right side, the blue bars are telling us what the annual capital investment should be to achieve the universal safely managed WASH. The dark gray is actually what would be needed to achieve only basic WASH services, and the light gray is what is currently being invested. So if during 2000 to 2015, we were investing around 15% of the total capital investment needed to accomplish universal access per the new SDG standards. Amanda already mentioned this estimated amount of 115 billion per year, of which sanitation accounts for 60% of the total. So to put it quite bluntly, the SDG 6 is a major challenge from the point of view of financing universal access to water services. I'm trying to make my slides run down, but for some reason they're getting stuck at the moment. Okay, my apologies. Okay, they seem stuck. So I have two options. I can either continue talking or just will try to stop and share again. And really apologize for the time lost here. Okay, let me see. Okay, so we'll not go into details with all of the other challenges besides the financing that are on the road to achieving universal safely managed WASH. But as we can see in the picture, the road can seem a little bit arduous, and we require all our creative power to have the human right to WASH services guaranteed. So in this context, it would seem wise to join forces to solve the problem, which will mean crowding in additional financial and also technical resources available within the private sector. From the World Bank Group, we are supporting the mobilization of finance for SDG 6, using both public and private finance, or a combination of both, from plain concessional or public borrowing, all the way through to commercial finance, which is only available for those service providers that are creditworthy. And more importantly, for the purposes of today's debate, is the need to accompany this process with technical assistance and capacity building, given the weak capacities for sector reform to improve the overall policies, regulatory and institutional frameworks that can really promote the trust required to enable the investments and the improvements to be happening. Secondly, to boost utility performance and creditworthiness. And third, partnering with private sector, both domestic and international private sector. So with that, I'm actually just going to jump into the couple of examples that I wanted to bring today to the table. This slide is very long, but I will just give you the essence of it. In Guayaquil, Ecuador, there is a long-term concession, 30 years, ongoing since 2001. This is a story of a mature partnership with a mix of public-private financing and very solid results as the concession approaches its already last decade of the operation. And this mix of funding has meant that EMAPAC, as the public municipal entity, is managing funds not allocated to the concession agreement and is using them to cooperate with the private operator in guaranteeing access to the services outside of the concession contract. So one problem which we saw in Guayaquil and is common to many developing countries is that it's actually summarized in the title of the slides: when you have the pipes, but you don't have the people. So it was the really very low connectivity rates of people from low income and vulnerable households connecting to the existing sewers. So as we were assessing a large financing package for the municipality of Guayaquil, a survey that was conducted at the time through that less than 50% of the households would be immediately connecting to the network and the infrastructure once it would be constructed. So the approach taken by EMAPAC was to put together a public financed connectivity program in collaboration with a private operator, working with the community, and so far has connected more than 100,000 people to the sewer network. By doing this, the main aspect of how they achieved to do this is increasing the construction of the household connection in the main contract to develop the collector infrastructure. But in order to do this, it was, of course, essential the involvement of the community, as for the contractor to go into the household needed the prior consent of the house owner, and to avoid legal issues, but also as an incentive to get the household engaged. They could choose the design, the position of the new toilet, etc. So from the structuring of the program, the selection of localities, the targeting of beneficiaries, to the socialization of the program, household inspections, the addition of the beneficiaries, and procuring of the services through the whole cycle of constructing the infrastructure. We can see here in the pictures some workers inside the household, and then in the backyard here, closing one of the pit latrines which was being used for the sanitation. And another very important item was the final agreement of the beneficiary, the household owner, by signing an acceptance certificate and receiving training regarding the benefits of being connected to the sewer network. One very important aspect that enabled the municipality to achieve this in coordination with the private operator was to put together, to put in place the right team with social skills. They were selected from the community themselves. Women were particularly coming forward to participate in this, and they received also some remuneration for being the linkage between the contractor and the community, and all throughout the process remained involved. So this was a boost also to the community in terms of providing some income and some expertise that they could then utilize in other instances. So a full-blown social engagement plan with different lines of intervention, including communication, citizen engagement, and also training. So basically, it was all about incentives. The three tools used, the legal instruments, we see there as the sticks. So basically passing municipal ordinances requiring people to connect to the sewer network. And also, introducing some fines for sewer services for lack of connection to sewer services, but also financing incentives with including financed connection fees with a repayment of 15 years, the opportunity to have a free design and reduced sewage tariffs, and everything made easy with certified contractors and a one-stop shop to have the service access done for them with their participation. I'm just going now to my second example. This is the wastewater treatment plant in Durban, South Africa. This is actually one of my favorite PPP stories. I just think it's got so much replicability potential. Basically, this was the first water reuse plant built in South Africa under a PPP. A concession was awarded to a private company, Durban Water Recycling, with Veolia as the international partner, technological and providing the technology and the expertise. So the motivation for this project, besides keeping the beautiful beaches of Durban clean, was the existence of two industries at the outskirts of the city, a paper mill and a refinery, which were the largest consumer of potable water in the region. And at the same time, the city of Durban was facing water shortages for the population, to the point that the city did not want industrial expansion further because of the shortages of water. This project has often been presented as a double win-win, or a win-win-win-win, bringing benefits for the city and its people by delaying the capital investments for any other solution, including a marine outfall, which the city was considering at the time. There was no capital investment for the city in the construction of the recycling plant. It was totally financed by the private operator. It also delayed for the city the capital investment for future bulk potable water supply infrastructure. Overall, released 7% of the production volumes, which could be redistributed to 220,000 households. It also meant a reduction in the city's operating costs and consequently reduced the cost of water services to the Durban citizens. It extended the life of the city's water catchment resources and had also social benefits from point of view of employment, as all of the plant's staff, including the management, are from the local community. There was also a scholarship program set up by the private operator, giving out 36 scholarships for tertiary studies. And the recycling plant has been the training ground for new staff, and once trained, these staff are moved to new contracts. For the two industrial users, there was a 60% water saving in the water tariff that they were paying before from the city. There was a lower escalation of prices of the recycled water compared to potable water, and significantly also enhanced the drought supply security. So overall, fantastic project achievements with treatment of wastewater to a very high quality standard, extensive reuse of existing infrastructure, and waste minimization with 98% of water utilization efficiency. So I will stop here and I will leave these more general remarks to the other part of the debate in the interest of time. So sorry if I rushed through these slides. I can provide more detail later during the Q&A. Thank you.
Patricia. Thank you, Patricia, and some really interesting examples there. I think it's nice to see some of the wider economics, social and cultural benefits and the environmental benefits of some of these more broad thinking PPP programs. Our next guest is no stranger to the People First PPP concept, as he's currently promoting its use for infrastructure development in support of the SDGs. Geoffrey Hamilton is Chief of the Cooperation and Partnerships section of the Economic Cooperation and Integration Division with the UN European Commission for Europe in Geneva. It's through his leadership that UNECE has developed guiding principles for People First PPPs to set down the enabling environment for such new models with a focus on transparency, capacity building, environmental sustainability, and stakeholder dialogue. He's encouraged the UNECE to engage more closely with the private sector, establishing a UNECE PPP Business Advisory Board that assists governments to develop high-quality infrastructure projects. Geoffrey, we welcome your introduction to the People First PPP concept.
Well, thank you very much, Amanda, and thank you for organising this timely and important webinar on such a critical topic, and also with very, very distinguished experts. I've met you working with us on developing an evaluation methodology for People First Public-Private Partnerships, as well as Anand too, and thank you for all your great work to this endeavour of giving more prominence, more momentum to People First Public-Private Partnerships as the way ahead. Now, in the time I have available, I wanted to present three key premises to my argument for advancing universal access to water and sanitation and as a human right. My first premise is that the greatest progress to gaining universal access to water and sanitation will be achieved by the mobilization of the private sector, and especially the large water companies with their global spread, their skills, and their managerial expertise and capability to really make a difference. Now, there are many projects that go on in developing countries, very poor countries, sometimes setting up a few wells and so on. But really, it's only the private sector with this capability of not just reaching a few hundred, but of reaching a few million. So we need to work with the private sector. Now, there's been many failures, but PPPs have not had a untarnished history, but there have been also counterbalanced by this a number of very notable successes. And Patricia has very eloquently presented these success stories for people's interest. So the second premise is that the PPP model has to be changed. It has to be revised. It has to be made transformative and dynamic, and people first. This is the third generation that Anand referred to in his presentation. People first differs from traditional PPP in a number of ways. First of all, it has sustainable development as its core and people as the main beneficiaries. It seeks 5 outcomes that are mentioned in this slide: increasing access to essential services, enhancing resilience, environmental sustainability, improving economic effectiveness and fiscal sustainability, promoting replicability, better training, and fully involving all stakeholders. And this is what we call value for people, rather than the traditional model, which was just value for money. PPP has to up its game, and it has to go in the direction of people first. The second difference is that people first really needs to involve people, and they need to be involved at every stage in the project life cycle. Traditional PPP tends to be a little bit rhetorical. Yes, of course, it's involves stakeholders. People first goes a little bit more deeply. I noticed, and the third difference is, we are in a campaign to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. It's not an option. We have to achieve it. And we have to do public-private partnerships, not as an option, which is, forgive me, sometimes what the multilateral development banks say, oh, it's just an option, as if they're quite scared of promoting PPP. No, we shouldn't be scared about promoting PPP. We just simply need to get on, achieve it, and do as many good, effective projects as possible. There needs to be a massive amount of PPPs to get people first PPPs to get to the goals. And fourthly, we need to see a less adversarial model of PPP. It's all about risk allocation, the private sector pushing the risk to the public pushing to the private sector. We need to get a much different, less adversarial model. The planet is at risk. Let's all work together to make it safe. The third premise is probably a little bit more kind of controversial, and it is referring to us in the United Nations. And we have in the United Nations to up our game towards the private sector. We have to overcome what exists in many UN agencies, a profound suspicion of the private sector and what it's up to. We need to engage the private sector for transformative change. In fact, I would wish to contend that the UN very rarely speaks about public-private partnerships. The UN prefers to call them multi-stakeholder partnerships, which is a little bit bland. NGOs inside the United Nations have been extremely successful with very pertinent case studies in turning the UN system against PPP. It's something that we have to be very cautious about. But sadly, we have to bring in the private sector if the Sustainable Development Goals. I suppose in the ideal world, it would be great if the public sector did everything, but that's just not going to happen. We have also the Global Compact, but the Global Compact doesn't do the operational work. So really the UN has to up its game and really seriously engage with the private sector. If someone had told me in 2015 that there would be literally hardly any campaigns to bring the private sector behind the UN SDGs, I simply wouldn't have believed it. But this is the stark reality. Indeed, there's such latent hostility towards the private sector coming from a number of areas that the private sector might actually be forgiven to keep its head down and not show any interest whatsoever in the UN SDGs. And maybe Neil from AQUAFED can shed some light on this. So the UN must now work together as one UN and seek to mobilize the private sector for the transformative agenda of people, planet, and prosperity. So in summary, the private sector is the actual game changer, in my view, in this program. They have to be mobilized. The second thing, we have to do it through the right form of public-private partnerships, the people first. And finally and thirdly, the UN too has to up its game and make the private sector an agent of transformative change. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Geoffrey. I like the way you state it. It's the PPP or People First PPPs, not just an option, but we need to as many as possible if we're going to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. Interesting. I'd like to next invite Irina to join us, as she has hands-on experience in developing government relations and PPPs in developing countries. She's a certified PPP professional and a regional project manager in SOS Children's Villages International, and a director of international business in the Global PPP Forum in South Korea. I understand that Irina is sharing with us today a case study from Luhansk in Ukraine, where she's been presenting the People First PPP concept, and in particular the need for stakeholder engagement. We look forward to hearing about your experiences in this region, Irina.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. I'm so happy to be here with you. Although I'm not really a specialist in water and sanitation project, however, my task today to share with you an experience how we as an NGO engage the stakeholders in our PPP project. Let me share my screen with you. Yeah, and oops, sorry. Yeah, before I come to the people first PPP benchmarks, I would like to share with you the information about what we are doing as SOS Children's Villages in different countries related with water and sanitation projects. We do have some small scale projects related with the water tracking services, like, for example, you can see on my screen, emergency relief programs in South Sudan, where we served 62 households and 372 individuals with the water tracking services. But that was a permanent solution, of course. And the second project here, it's a water project in Ghana. You can see that the beneficiaries of these projects related with construction of water point is much more higher. However, it's still small scale contracts, and this is not definitely for people first PPPs. Unfortunately, SOS Children's Villages is limited with the building of water and sanitation project infrastructure by our SOS Children's Villages, kindergartens, Herman Manor schools, medical and social centers, and also public schools supported by SOS. So this is it, what we do actually in water and sanitation projects. However, we do know that, every project which we start to negotiate requires a lot of stakeholder engagement actions. And we always start first to negotiate with the government. Do they need this kind of project? How we can make a complementary actions to each other. So in 2018, we started to investigate actually the PPP as a new, absolutely new mechanism for NGO sectors. Because this is rather complicated if compared with the grant proposals, for example, and it requires a specific knowledges. So we started from Kyrgyzstan. We started from the PPP professional training for SOS co-workers from 9 CIS countries, and also key ministries from Kyrgyz government. Yeah. That was actually the training. It's simple training. However, that was a great communication platform when we started to discuss whether it's possible to go to social PPP in this country. And all the key ministries, they have confirmed that yes, we didn't think about social PPPs yet in childcare sector. However, now we are sure that we can go forward. The next event was in Kenya. It was PPP conference for Wake Up, ESAF, MENA, CIS, and LAM regions with 52 participants and 24 countries, and also the representatives from the government of Kyrgyzstan, Burkina Faso, and Kenya. And we also started to negotiate about possibilities in now I call it people first PPP, because we always going, from people needs. And again, all the government representatives, they confirmed that yes, we have an interest in that kind of model of cooperation with the NGOs. Yeah. And now I came to the particular case which I want to share with you in more details. It's about Ukraine case. We are now at the stage of, again, initiating of the People First PPP project related with the children in difficult life circumstances. You can see that in the Lugansk region, there are 12,664 children like this. And also, Ukraine has now implementation process on deinstitutionalization. And they have in Lugansk region 1,721 children who still live in residential institution, and we have to take care about them and to provide them with the alternative care services, right? And of course, SOS Children's Village Ukraine cannot do it alone for sure, because we have very limited capacity, and we started to negotiate with the government of Lugansk region about potential People First PPP. I think it's necessary to say that in Lugansk region there is no any single PPP project for today, and this for them it's kind of you know, I mean, it's a very important process which we started from our side. Yeah, and in July 2020, we have conducted a webinar on People First PPP. And there was nearly 100 participants from the government of Lugansk region. But what was the difference between previous events and this event? That there was almost all territorial communities also participated in this webinar. That was 3 days, and I know that the materials which we delivered during this webinar was very complicated for the ordinary people, you know, who never heard about PPP. However, we succeed with 2 days of the theory, and also 1 day we spent for discussion of stakeholder engagement evaluation criteria, which we have now in the process of development in UNECE project. Yeah, so we have considered only stakeholder engagement criteria and benchmark, and actually we went through all 19 criteria related with this benchmark. So what was the outcome of this webinar? That first of all, the government of Lugansk region accepted, you know, in a very good way, impact assessment tool as a tool. They said that this is a great instrument for self-assessment for them. For today, actually stakeholder engagement in any kind of state projects or public procurement projects, it is regulated by the local legislation, and they do have some processes in terms of stakeholder engagement. However, they still have problems and lack of knowledge how to do that in practice, you know, in an efficient way. So they have a lack of mechanisms, I would say. Yeah? So during our in-depth discussion, there was some feedback from the government of Lugansk region, what kind of support they need actually for more efficient stakeholder engagement. So one of the need is practical mechanism based on international experience, because in Ukraine there are very few PPP projects, and especially in social sector there is, I mean, very limited number of PPPs. And of course, international experience is very useful in this case. For example, they said about necessity to provide a stakeholder plan engagement, the plan of stakeholder engagement templates, right? Which was used, for example, for in other countries or other organizations. Also some guidelines or recommendations from UNECE as far as UNECE is promoting people first, as well as, for example, key KPIs, how government can evaluate whether they are working efficiently or not. One of the open questions, for example, was what is the reasonable percentage of engagement from the community side or from vulnerable people side? What is the, should it be, I don't know, 50% or more than 50, something like that? Because formally they do have the procedure based on legislation. They have different round tables and protocols, menus, and even they have oversight committee in Lugansk region, which is the permanent body. However, they are not still very sure that it is efficient. The second point was training. They said we need trainings on stakeholder engagement and in general about People First PPP, because this webinar, which we have organized as SOS Children's Villages, that was the first event for them where they heard about People First PPP model in general. So the more training could be provided for them, they see that the more capacity they have on the regional level, and of course, more efficient projects could be developed. And the third one, actually, in order to to develop the people first environment in the location in the Lugansk region, they need to make some steps, some practical steps like capacity building and involvement of the external PPP expert, for example, right? And they need also funding. The problem is that this is regional level, not central level. And this region is affected by the war, by the military conflict. So a lot of people are suffering there. Government's supposed to solve, a lot of social issues. However, they have lack of financing, and of course, they are looking for any support from the international organization, from the central government, from NGOs like SOS Children's Villages, for example, in searching of the proper funding on development of people first PPPs. Yeah, and so this is my last slide, and I would like to say that I do support Geoffrey, that people first PPP not the option for social project. It's a really instrument which we have to be focused in the nearest future, because this instrument or mechanism ensure that the social services which could be provided during these projects could be really sustainable. Yeah, it's especially when we are talking about vulnerable people or children. We cannot provide them services like for 3-5 years. We have to be responsible for that during long-term period. Thank you so much.
For giving us a practical project where, as we speak, you're testing out some of the ideas that are coming through the People First PPP program at UNECE. And it's clearly not easy to do. And that's true of a lot of these human rights-based approaches. So I'd like to introduce our last speaker, Neil Dhot, who brings with him the perspective of the private sector water service providers and the challenges that they face today. As Executive Director of AQUAFED, Neil has spent the last 7 years of his career in water federations in the UK and Europe, and has many years in public relations, especially with local municipal authorities in the UK. Representing 400 members from 40 countries, all of which are water and wastewater service providers, Neil is able to share with us a global snapshot of the range and types of problems that these companies face in trying to support the SDG 6. Neil.
Thanks, Amanda, and thanks everyone. Hello everyone, welcome, good evening, good morning. I'm not going to do any slides. I'm just going to try and talk really quickly, just make some quick points, and because I'd rather answer, I'm sure people have got questions for me, so I'll do it that way. This webinar is excellent, it's perfect timing, and I also think the UNECE work on PPPs is absolutely critical right now. AQUAFED members thoroughly support it. One or two other members in particular are very heavily involved in it as well. And it's really critical to improving the trust and confidence in PPPs, just as Geoffrey mentioned so eloquently before. I mean, PPPs, quite frankly, these days now suffer a reputational and brand issue that's a legacy of 30 years ago. There are still some outdated views. I don't want to dwell too much on the past, but still when I see slides from someone like Anand mentioning things in the first sentence of the first generation, saying there was high tariffs and runaway profits was the phrase. I think you need to contextualize that actually, because I think actually private companies lost a whole load of money back in the early 90s. They didn't just make runaway profits. But you see my point. This is the problem that we're still trying to overcome with PPPs now. I'm very grateful to Patricia for presenting both the examples of Guayaquil, I can't even pronounce it properly, in Ecuador, and Durban as kind of how modern successful PPPs work. I know they work. They are a tried and tested model. I think certainly with the Ecuador example, it touches on a particular point that Geoffrey mentioned as well about, he said people need to be involved at every level and people first need to go through more deeply. And that's the thing I'm going to just focus on very quickly now. partnership is crucial. And I know that's one of the elements of the principles and also in the people first approach. That's key to this. And the Ecuador example shows it. I think that if you have buy-in from people on a PPP right from the start, and there's an honest debate about why prices may or may not need to increase, who will pay the least, who will pay the most, there's that deep understanding of who every single customer is, then the PPP will be very, very successful. Matched with the fact that you'll actually listen to real people and understand their needs. That for me is a human rights-based PPP approach, and that's what success looks like. It really is about the engagement and bringing people in. That's what, exactly as Patricia said, it's not what happened 30 years ago in Latin America. A lot of things were done that actually needed to be done, but people were never, it was never explained to them properly. There was never an honest debate throughout that whole thing, and that's why it was a complete failure. So I believe that this UNECE work is absolutely critical to the trust and confidence, and long may that continue, really. Participation, and also finally data and monitoring, and this is where I think the private operators really do have one of the areas where we are really advanced is we are able to monitor and collect data much better, which we are just very good at it, I believe, and that data needs to be made more transparent. But I think there's still this huge misunderstanding, and perhaps from some of the participants as well. It's not the private operators that are reluctant to publish this data. It depends on what the municipality or state want. They are in charge here, right? All these PPPs, successful ones that were happening now in, say, Middle East and Far East, where PPPs are thriving, is because there's a strong hand of government or the strong hand of the municipality taking control. And that's the difference. And I think with the human rights-based approach, where you have private operators being allowed to and able to publish all this data and to have an honest debate in the public, it's what is most crucial. I'm going to stop there because I've just danced around a few issues, but hopefully that gives you some of the perspectives of the private operators. But again, just to end, to say that this work is absolutely critical, and it needs to be backed with my organisation actually getting off its backside more to also provide more success stories and data on how these PPPs are performing. So Geoffrey, Amanda, I thank you both, because your work has actually been a real kick up the backside to us as well.
Neil, so thank you for that, and we'll see how we go in the Q&A. And ask you some telling questions. I think there's it's obviously a really compelling topic, and we're all struggling with finding a solution to how we actually scale up and how we reach marginalized communities. And I have a strong belief that the human rights-based approach is part of the solution, especially since we have those international standards and norms already sitting there that we can use to help governments to get a bit more trust in the private sector. But they need to take on responsibility as well, and they can do that through the governance framework that they put together. So I'd like to hand over now to Anand, who's going to moderate the next stage of the event with the Q&A for the panelists. Anand, please, would you like to take the floor?
Thank you again, Amanda. And I would like to appreciate the various views which have been expressed by the panelists from their experience. Just a couple of follow-up questions which come to my mind based on the presentations which have been made. And if I may start with Klaus. From a HDG perspective, what do you see as the most important factor that is preventing the PPPs from reaching the marginalized people? When we are talking of SDG 6, we are talking of water and sanitation for all. And yet, even in this presentation, we have exchanged views that all the marginalized people are not necessarily getting the benefit of the connectivity. So can I ask Klaus, what is the important factor as he sees it from the UN water perspective? Anil, I'll definitely come to you. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Anand. Can you hear me okay? Thanks. No, I obviously work most on SDG 6, but I will try to widen the lens to kind of talk about the whole 2030 agenda. And I think thanks all the panelists for sharing all your perspectives and all the case studies of this tool, which I think can really make a huge difference to this. And just to rewind the tape a little bit, first of all, to January, where why I'm doing this is because in the UN, that was a time where the UN Secretary General launched the Decade of Action because the SDGs was already quite far off track. And why I'm saying this is obviously then COVID hit, and which has meant both that progress has been taken back, in some cases decades, and the financial for the resources available will be less actually going forward. And also to Geoffrey's point that yes, PPPs need to be streamlined. So I think this is why the people first PPP is important, and it really aligns it with the 2030 agenda, which in my view can be a real game changer in enabling the international community and UN and so on to really embrace them to a larger extent. And when we look at all the SDGs, obviously with less funding, we need to invest in solutions that tackle many SDGs at the same time. And I think the people first approach that takes the leaving no one behind, that takes the human rights approach lens can really make that choice easier. What are the projects that really can have the most benefit? And coming back to SDG 6, and just to mention quickly, so I mentioned the Global Acceleration Framework, which aims to really take the UN system, governments and private sector and civil society to work better together going forward. And just a few things on this that I think can be relevant for this discussion is that, first of all, it needs to be demand driven. So it needs to be coming really from demand from the local level. And this is how the acceleration framework is structured. And the one more thing just on what can make the difference, I think, is accountability, which is a key part of the framework and something that is built in. So for example, at the launch, all heads of UN entities stood behind and launched it together, which is, it might seem not so much, but it's quite a big thing, because it means that all agencies working on all these different SDGs come together to work together. And just one other thing on accountability, that as part of it, it will be an annual moment introduced at the high level political forum, which is a UN event to review the SDGs. That will look specifically on how we are doing on SDG 6. So I think this can also be useful. But just to wrap up, I think in this context of accelerating action, I think the PP First PPP can really help to bridge the gap between all the different actors. Thanks.
Thank you, Klaus. On the same subject, I think Neil wanted to make a remark. Let me also request Neil that I'll add to one more facet which I would like to answer. I'd like you to answer, and that is that how do the members of AQUAFED see the human rights being a way in which the services can be reached to the marginalized and the vulnerable people? So both of these are interlinked questions. Maybe you can take on both of those in your answer now.
Yeah, thanks, Anand. Okay, so I think I'll come to your question specifically. Hopefully it will be answered in the way I'll do the first question. But the question initially was, what's happening to the most marginalized? And well, my view is, and this is more personal rather than AQUAFED, I must say, but the people in the most marginalized and the ones that are in most danger of being left behind are seen very much as charity. and it's kind of and there's a donation type approach to them, and I think that's all wrong, actually. And it's not helping people. It's not helping people who are the most marginalized actually lift themselves up and be self-sufficient, because that's what they want. It's almost, and some people almost describe it as a kind of post-colonial approach. And so I think that was madness. But part of me now personally thinks that the mentality of the kind of particularly Western world donors needs to change, because it seems still very much about just charity and little bits rather than actually something more significant. As an example, I saw a very well-known water organization charity just today, an international one that we all know, talking about with pride about building more boreholes. And I presume that's going to be in areas where water shortages are already rife. And I just think, what's sustainable about that? Nothing. What should be happening now is that local entrepreneurs and local people should be enabled, and their capacity should be being built to look at things like water reuse and water technologies a lot more. Organizations like Toilet Board Coalition, that I know Amanda knows, are trying to do this. So this, what we should be doing is actually creating a business ecosystem that is local and it's well regulated, and we should be building the capacity that way rather than just throwing pots and little bits of money in a very uncoordinated way. That's my real frustration. In terms of how AQUAFED members see the human rights-based approach, well, everything that we do is in some way pushing forward one of the 5 principles, because usually a PPP is set up to either improve quality, to improve access, to improve the frequency and cut breakages of supply. So across the 5 areas, the contracts are, by their nature, with private operators set up in that way. So I think, I know my members, that's how they see the world. They do see it, they don't, albeit they may not badge it like that, but they are naturally seeing it through a human rights lens, because that's what they're trying to do. And if the public or the contracting authority asks them to do a job which is connecting the most marginalized, that's what they will do, plain and simple.
Thank you, Neil. I think I do also share your perspective that quite often when it comes to giving connections to the poor and marginalized, it is seen as a charity, when in fact the absence of connection has coping costs for these people, which is far higher than the formal connected network. So in fact, I do completely share with you, it's a question of how probably one designs these projects in a more, I would say, a result-oriented basis about the coverage.
Yeah.
But taking the same theme, let me come to Patricia. And from your experience from the World Bank projects, how do you see the human rights approach, again, ensuring that the compulsory inclusion is done of all the poor and marginalized people, so that water is delivered to them at a minimum quantity that is sufficient for sustenance? Again, a linked up question, Patricia.
Hi, can you hear me well, Anand?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Thank you. And I'm not sure that you can see me. I'm just having an issue regaining the control of the Zoom.
We can see you also.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I will take it a little bit where Neil was left it. I think, you know, under a PPP, it will be done whatever the terms and conditions of the agreement say, provided that, you know, each of the parties is committed to the partnership in terms of bridging for solutions when there are unforeseen circumstances or conflicts around issues, which, you know, is bound to be the case. And the longer the period, the more bound for issues to come up. So the commitment, again, to finding creative solutions to problems is essential, and of course, you know, with trust and wanting the contract to succeed. Now, you know, many countries have been thinking about this minimum water guaranteed. In fact, Durban is also an example of a place where it has been done, and other countries and also local governments have been thinking about this. I think it's very, for this to be successful, it's important that first that it's embedded in the regulatory framework, if at national level, even better, at municipal level too, but even more importantly, that the financing mechanism is identified upfront, and that normally the cost of providing that minimum volumes is going to be subsidized by the public sector. So public sector needs to have done prior calculation, quantification, following a scientific, a practical approach to it, so that it is something certain, this is something predictable, there is a solution identified where that's going to come from. It seems something very obvious, but I have seen instances of countries that are including in their new law a minimum water volume is to be guaranteed, following, yes, a human-based approach to water, but completely oblivious to the question of where the funding for that is going to come from, or what is the actual mechanism by which the subsidy is going to be transferred to either local government, and of course if there is a private partner in place, that it becomes even more important for partners to be successful. So,
Patricia, I think we are not able to hear you very well.
No, can you hear me now?
Yeah, this is better.
Yeah. So just to recap, important that it's embedded in the regulatory framework, but even more important that the financing mechanism is identified upfront so that it can be predictable. And a third reflection, just a final one to your question, would be the private sector or the private partner is also very keen in expanding their customer base, and is also just because it's private sector is not to say that they are not interested in the positive social outcomes. I do agree, and I will. This is a more general remark, but I do agree with the points made earlier by Geoffrey and also Niels and the other colleagues, also Irina, that we have to lose this fear to private sector as being some sort of an unsold entity, and in fact, for humanity to move forward, it's we are all also private sector at an individual level. So.
Right.
Stopping here for now.
Thank you, Patricia. I think it's a two-way street for sure between the private sector and the service receivers as well as the service sort of facilitators. Coming to Geoffrey now. Geoffrey, from the UN perspective, you mentioned that while PPPs have not been that much a catchword in the UN, but multi-stakeholder partnerships have been the catchword. Now, how do you think it is possible to invigorate the private sector to support the SDGs so that the delivery of water and sanitation for all can find a lot of support from the private sector? Geoffrey? Geoffrey, we can't hear you. Your microphone is muted, I think.
Sorry, thank you, Anand. I think that's now better. I hope it is. So thank you, and thank you also to the speakers who have expressed their interest in the people first approach. Yes, I think the people first approach is necessary for all the reasons alluded to. We have to stick our heads above the parapet. Private sector, even UN functionaries like myself, and make a bit of commotion, make a bit of a fuss. I mean, it was mentioned, I think earlier, about the holistic solutions that People First can provide. Water and sanitation, it's not just a problem of the environment, of conserving water. It's not just listening to women and girls about the water and sanitation systems that they need. It's not just about providing services to the poor, which are more affordable. It's all these things together. It's putting them all together and doing this in a holistic way. And this is why I think we're all passionate about the people first. But it's a necessary condition, Anand, but it's not a sufficient one to advance what we're trying to do, the UN Sustainable Development Goals and SDG number 6. We need capacity building. And this was mentioned a lot by represented by Irina from mentioning Loeffen. Take forward projects efficiently and effectively that are quite complicated, and does that rather quickly to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. Training can sometimes takes a long time. How do we do it quickly? I'm Scottish, as you know, Anand, and I was very impressed by the Scottish Futures Trust, who've established something called a hub company, which delivers municipal services for regions in Scotland extremely successfully, and they're turbocharging the process there in water, in sanitation, in schools, and in healthcare. And that's something we need to look at. And I would say we would also very much appreciate Loeffen's involvement in this project to develop pilot projects, to build community resilience, to build back stronger. But we also need to look at the government agenda. And here we have to recognize that the governments have to take some actions. And first of all, they have to reform the tariff system so that it reflects true costs, so that the private sector can be attracted to make investments. This is so important. Protect the poor with subsidies, that's not the problem, but the private sector is not going to be interested with some of the ridiculous policies that we see governments. I'm sorry, we've got to be absolutely clear on that and know. Also there should, and I was very interested what Neil said about the transparency issue of agreements. We need to be absolutely clear and crystal as to what these agreements between the private and the public sector are about. And it is sometimes the governments which are preventing the information flowing about these agreements. How dare companies, how dare private sector, and how dare these partnerships stop the people, the communities knowing about the terms and conditions of the projects? It's got to stop. And finally, we have to talk about a more strategic approach to this particular problem. It's looking at the UN SDGs, what has to be done to fill to close the gaps, ensure better access, more access to water and sanitation services. Why don't people talk about action plans? Why don't we actually start to say, public, private, get together, find out the action plans, give us timelines, give us resources, but let's try and get some action going in these formulas and do it in a strategic way, particularly focusing on communities which are in great distress. Thank you, Anand.
Thank you, Geoffrey. I think you spoke without any hesitation of where the reforms need to be done and what transparency mechanisms can actually help in the people first PPPs. And taking that cue of the stakeholder engagement in people first PPP, can I request Irina to comment about what does she see as the role of the NGOs in the stakeholder engagement process of people first PPPs?
Thank you very much for the question, Anand. Well, first of all, I think NGO has to play a significant role in stakeholder engagement. because first, all NGOs, I mean, almost all NGOs, they are focused on SDGs. And, they are not looking for money in this kind of cooperation, but mostly for SDG realization. So we are on the same page, I would say, with all who is promoting People First PPP. The second one, NGO could be a mediator between different stakeholder groups, like government, because they really work with the government for a long-term basis. With the communities, because NGOs usually goes to that kind of people who are not achieved by the government, and NGOs knows people needs more in details, I would say, because this is for them day-to-day business, right? Also, usually NGOs also working with the business, and there are some group of social impact investors who are interested specifically in a social impact, not even in the value for money. And NGOs is a great resource to support the government and investors, to ensure that social impact is there. And all these projects give us a significant impact to the society back on a long-term basis. Yeah, and I think the last but not least point in my list is that NGO could play a significant role in awareness raising, and also to ensure the political will, in general, to go to People First PPPs. As far as usually NGOs works on different levels, like on the central government level, on international level, and also on the local municipalities level, right? So they are everywhere, I would say, and this is about multinational stakeholder engagement. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Irina. I think we are running a little short on time. So there are a lot of questions which have been raised by the participants as well. Amanda, would you like to bring forth some of the questions raised by the participants also? Thank you.
Thank you, Anand. And I've been trying to see whether we're answering any of the questions as we go along, because actually the panelists have spoken quite widely about their areas of interest and expertise. I think one or two of the questions that might be worth bringing up, and I'll open it to the floor rather than direct it to a particular panelist. One question from Tony Slater about, he's asking if there are any examples that you can come up with where there's been a People First PPP that really has dealt with marginalized people that have been left behind. If you can come up with any examples that you can think of on that. And then maybe if I can give you another question to think about, and maybe you can volunteer to answer. I'm going to suggest that you wrap this up with your closing remarks as well, because we only have about 6 minutes left. So I'll give you each a minute maybe to answer either these questions or to make some wrap-up points. The other one that I thought was around the engagement of women, and this is from Mariette Verhoef-Cohen, who explains that it's very difficult for CSO or NGO organizations to involve and get support from the private sector. And women organizations and women's projects only get a tiny percentage of ODA, like 0.05%, whilst the cooperation of women organizations and private sector would really benefit from women and girls tremendously, and would improve and implement the SDGs more and achieve more positive results. So how do we get more investment from the private sector, and especially for women's organizations? So those are the two questions, and I think Neil wants to go first. Try and just give us a minute or so, Neil, if you wouldn't mind, because we haven't got a lot of time.
Yeah, no, I'll be very quick. Just to answer Marit's question, particularly about getting women more involved. The practical examples I've seen of where women have been involved has been directly to help private operators in their service delivery. A brilliant example is in Delhi, where the Veolia were working there, or still are, trying to extend the network and get rid of this problem where criminals are basically bringing tankered water of very crap quality into a certain few slums. and instead Veolia were trying to increase connections to their network. They engaged with an organisation for women that then went around with the Veolia guys and girls and to talk to the women and get them to make the decision and got them connected. And it was where an NGO had pitched itself as being directly able to help the delivery of the service or the matter in hand, which in this case was a human rights win because it created access for women, for households that didn't have it before, and it also improved the quality of the water they are at. So I think that's the way, is to kind of pitch it in a way that you're helping the business.
Okay, thanks, Neil. If I go in the order that I can see you, Geoffrey, would you like to say a few remarks, either answering those questions or just closing remarks? Just a minute, please, of your time. Yeah.
You've raised on empowerment. I think that's absolutely vital. In people first, public private, a huge emphasis needs to be put. And so much can be done by companies. Train women to be entrepreneurs in the communities in which they make the investment. Support women-led companies in the supply chain. Bring women into the design of decision-taking of projects in water and sanitation. And for goodness sake, make sure that women are represented better in the senior boards of companies. I don't want to embarrass Neil, but sure, many water companies are led by women. But I'll skip that. Tony Slater also mentioned about examples of people first, public, private. We have a database, but more than this now, Tony, we have an evaluation methodology with Young Road, which score projects across people first credentials. So instead of saying Dabu and, now we will have some degree of science in which we can say something is people first and is actually helping distressed communities and vulnerable groups. Thank you.
Thanks, Geoffrey. Irina, do you have a last comment to make?
I think I will be very quick. First of all, thank you so much that I'm privileged to be here and to share our experience in social PPPs. And I just want to call you, to be united and let's go together to people first PPPs. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Irina. And Klaus, do you have something to add that you would like to say at this point? Just something quickly.
Sure. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
No, just to say that I was happy to be thrown into this panel last minute. It's been a really great discussion, and personally, I've learned a lot. And it's really, to me, I mean, it's a powerful tool, and it can really provide us with a common language going forward. So looking forward to that. Thanks.
Great, thank you. And last but not least, Patricia. You have 1 minute to finish.
Thank you, and I hope the sound is okay now because it was cracking up a little bit earlier.
Yes.
Also, to say thank you very much to you for organizing this, to all the colleagues that and speakers that have participated, and those connected that have posed wonderful questions. I have actually tried to answer as many as I could, but I realized I've provided a couple of links to someone that was asking for specific templates or resources. These may not work with the copy and pasting, so I'll make sure I get them to you so that you can put them up in the website. As a more general remark, I liked very much Geoffrey's passionate, I would even say, call for a change of mentality, an approach to this. In line with that, I would even propose a revision of the acronym. PPP could stand for policies, partnerships, and people instead of the traditional acception. It's just an idea, or at least for us here. And really would like to take this call to join the efforts to scale up and to replicate the successful and innovative cases under this lens of human right to water to reach the universal access, which is what we are after.
Oh, lovely. Well, thank you, Patricia, and thank you to all of the panelists today. This is really clearly a hot topic for many people. And based on the participation today, and also I think it can potentially provide pragmatic solutions to scale up and attract funding. I'm really looking forward to further engagement with anyone that's interested in continuing this conversation, as we're planning to work on a range of tools and structured engagements to create a more constructive governance framework to support both the human rights-based approach for greater inclusivity and sustainability, and structured recommendations for standards to lower investment risk. I'd really like to thank all our participants, the panelists and the attendees for your interest, for your questions, for your active online chat, and for your time to listen today. And thank you very much, and we look forward to staying in touch with you all. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you.